Okay, so that was a perfect segue because so what we're talking about is modern versus traditional, but not necessarily versus, but rather how either astrology has evolved or devolved from, in my opinion, mostly devolved from what once was, and from the period that I'm mostly focused in, which is basically from the 2nd century until the 17th century. So one of the reasons that I decided to do this was because I'm also very involved with jyotish. And because jyotish has a very specific idea of what the nodes are about. And this whole idea of, the nodes being what it is that our sole purpose is or whatever, that's really actually quite modern. It's really only within the last maybe not even 50 years. The creator of that idea is a guy named Martin Shulman, who basically kind of took stuff from the jyotish because at this point, starting to look into past lives was starting to become big. And starting in the early 80s, there was this whole movement towards past life regression and going into hypnosis to remember your past lives. And then when Shirley MacLaine, who was Warren Beatty's sister, when Shirley MacLaine, who was this huge movie star, got into the New Age movement, then she took it to a whole other level. And all of a sudden we had this, hello, ZT, welcome. We just started. So you're not really missing anything. I'm just kind of doing a little bit of preliminary. And my main point in this preliminary is that this aspect of looking at the nodes from a Western astrology perspective as our sole purpose, or what it is we're here to do, that part, there we go, that is new. That's new. That's probably less than 50 years old, and it just kind of snowballed. It's kind of like how Chiron snowballed. Chiron is also from around that period, from the 80s, and it became kind of a thing. And I remember the first time it was in Mountain Astrologer and all of those other things. And then when Liz Green wrote a book about it, it became this huge thing, and it's just kind of snowballed from there. This is from a website, a modern astrology website. So none of this is my material, but this kind of encapsulates what the belief is about what the nodes do. So the astrologers use the nodes to determine where your destiny lies, the North Node, and what you were in past lifetimes. So this whole, now, okay, so that's important because it's important to remember or to understand that there is no tradition of reincarnation in Western astrology. There isn't. There really isn't. The only astrological tradition that has the tradition of reincarnation is jyotish. And so karma and reincarnation and moksha, liberation, all of that stuff is kind of wrapped up into the entire gestalt of the astrology in India. In the West, because almost all of the Western astrology comes from the Christianized or the Muslim Middle East or the Christianized Europe, then we're not talking about reincarnation. So all of this comes from the New Age period of the 80s, which is Louise Hay, Shirley MacLaine, etc. So that's where this comes from. So that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily true, but I just want to put it into context that this is a really, really, shall we say, recent acquisition. This idea of looking to astrology to discover your past life or to have some kind of idea about your karma, looking to Western astrology to look into karma is extremely new. So the nodes change every 18 months, blah, blah, blah. So it even says here, Kabbalah's astrology focuses primarily on the lunar nodes. This system calls the North Node your tikkun. So tikkun olam is kind of like, your directional pull, your tikkun or correction, and view it as the karmic adjustment your soul must make. The nodes of the moon suggest personal karmic imbalance. Thus, consciously working on these life lessons can bring us to increased happiness and fulfillment. So my entire premise for this particular session is to investigate this, because I've always been really skeptical. And so let's just continue on for a second. North node and south node. So your life purpose is encoded in the north node. This is continuing from this same website. Your potential in this life is what the north node is considered to be now, what you're capable of, where you can find your ultimate happiness and fulfillment, but it's an energy that we supposedly haven't learned. And so using this dichotomy of the north and the south node, which are opposing each other, the south node is supposed to represent that which we're unconsciously already inclined towards. And the north node is supposed to represent what's coming, what we should be inclining ourselves towards in this particular lifetime. So that's the modern view. So as far as Rahu and Ketu, which are the north node and the south node, are considered, I just thought I would bring up, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of time, because what I want to do is really kind of look at charts and kind of get into this idea, because get into this, first of all, looking at Rahu and Ketu, and then I want to introduce us to my other technique for looking at, which is actually a medieval technique for looking at for the soul in the chart and looking at soul purpose through that lens and seeing which one we like better or if they actually intersect. So the Rahu and Ketu were actually one asura. Asura is a word for demon, and was a dragon-like asura. And Vishnu decided that he wanted to make all of the gods immortal. So he decided to churn this ocean, which held the nectar of immortality. It's called the Amrita. And so he's churning the ocean with the help of the gods, and this dragon slips in and drinks some of it. So while that's happening, Vishnu sees it, he slashes the animal in half, or the dragon in half, but of course the dragon is already immortal. And so that dragon is Rahu and Ketu. And the important thing to understand about the function, first of all, they're not real, right? There's nothing, they're not really up there in the sky, but the belief is that the nodes are that which eclipse the sun and the moon. So when we have a full eclipse, it's actually Rahu or Ketu who are devouring the sun and taking their, it's not necessarily the moon that's blocking, it's actually Rahu or Ketu who are devouring either of those lights. So, and usually what you'll find is that either the sun is with the nodes, or the nodes are either next to it, or next to in the next sign over, or something like that. Okay, so in Jyotish, Rahu and Ketu are called shadow planets, and some believe that they own signs. There are certain signs that they are said to co-own. So for instance, Rahu is said to co-own Aquarius. Ketu is said to co-own Scorpio. Rahu is said to be exalted in Taurus or Virgo, Taurus or Virgo, and Ketu in Sagittarius, if I'm not mistaken, which of course is a double sign, right? So it's a half human and half animal, and so Ketu is also kind of the animal half, you could say, of this particular demon. So both deal with what's going on with light, what's going on with our connection to light. And so I can't remember the name of this particular movie, but there's a famous film that had Billy Bob Thornton in it, where a man and his friend find a crashed plane with $10 million in it. And it basically goes through how finding it changes them, how it brings us to murder, it brings them to all of these horrible, horrible things. And and it's basically a story of Rahu. It's basically a story of how, in order to get what we want, we turn from the light. So so the light is supposed to be the light of goodness and the light of virtue. So Rahu is a type of darkness, and it's the darkness as the agent of ambition, or the appearance of importance. It becomes that thing that moves us away from the light. It's the choices that we make that move us away from the light. When we get that job at that law firm, and the lawyer and the partner at the law firm has us do something really unethical, and we go ahead and do it, and it gets us to the next point in our career, that's the Rahu. That's the Rahu in ambition, as the agent of ambition. And so Rahu mostly affects us on the material level. because think of Rahu as not just the head of the dragon, but the mouth of the dragon, where we consume. And Ketu is called moksha karaka. So moksha is essentially where we are able to cut ourselves away from the cycle of life and death, of rebirth, of life and rebirth. And so moksha is when we actually free ourselves from that cycle. Now, once again, this is the tradition that encapsulates reincarnation. And Rahu and Ketu, with Rahu, we're creating all this karma. With Ketu, we've decided that we no longer want to. And so what we tend to see is this uncoupling, this disengagement, pauses and interruptions, moving towards the ethereal, esoteric, and otherworldly. So as Rahu kind of firmly places us in the material and asks us, what will we do? How far will you go? To what length will you go to get what you want? It's Ketu that says, you know, I no longer find any pleasure in this. I'm disillusioned. The Ketu will give you the disillusionment because it doesn't want to create new karma. Okay, so that's the jyotish. Now, okay, so one of the things that we haven't really talked about is there some kind of traditional viewpoint of the nodes? And it's extremely scant. One of the things that you tend to see in ancient texts is that good planets are good with the north node, and bad planets are bad with this, and good planets are bad with the south node, and vice versa. And then you also tend to see that planets with nodes generally are considered impeded. So I think you might see probably around the same time, you'll see a little bit of both, or you might see earlier where any kind of connection to the nodes, conjunction that is, any kind of conjunction to the nodes is considered an impediment. And then later on, maybe going towards Lily's time in the 17th century, benefics with the north node are considered good, malefics with the south node are considered good. But this is kind of the basic technique for delineating the nodes. All right, so we note the sign in the house position, and that's kind of where most people kind of end. Right, it's a very, in my opinion, kind of shallow technique for this particular thing. So we note the sign in the house position of the nodes, and then I added a few things based on a book that I was reading called Karmic Control Planets, where basically this Vedic astrologer was saying that he believed that the nodes as shadow planets were really working for the planets who ruled the signs that they occupied. So if your node was in Gemini, if your north node was in Gemini, then the north node was really working for Mercury. And that Mercury was the real nature of the karma, but was the real kind of the governor of the karmic experience, but the executor of the karmic experience would be the nodes. Okay, so that was his idea from the Vedic perspective, and we'll look at some of that as well. So we're going to note the sign and house position of the nodes. We're going to note any planets conjuncting or opposing the nodes, obviously, and note any planets ruling the nodes. Now you might ask, oh, what about if they're squaring the nodes or something? That's a different thing called on the bends, and that tends to create a kind of what do they say? It's kind of an idiosyncratic expression of the planet who is squaring both nodes. But that's a little bit different. But really, as far as the delineation of what's going on with the nodes, or what we're going to look at today, it's going to be these three things: sign and house position, planets conjuncting or opposing, and planets ruling. Okay, so if we're looking at it from this particular perspective. Now, the other perspective comes from medieval astrology, and it's based on Aristotle and his idea of the soul, and how the soul was based on the rational or intellectual, the sensory or perceptive, or the vegetative, that these are the three parts or three levels of soul. The vegetative, as you can see, is responsible for growth and the taking in of nourishment, period. Sensory or perceptive includes our desires and appetites as dictated by the senses, certain emotions and movement. And then the rational or intellective responsible for the formulation of thought and the ability to put that which is perceived by the sensible soul into words or thoughts. So, what is soul? Soul represents the essential whatness of a body. Astrologically, soul represents the essential who-ness of the native. Soul is substance that corresponds to the definitive formula of a thing's essence. So the soul is the essence of who you are, the essential who-ness of you. And so if the eye were an animal, sight would be its soul. Makes sense? For the pupil plus the power of sight constitutes the eye. So the soul plus the body constitutes the animal. So the moon is the representative of the vegetative and the sensory soul. In later works, the ascendant and ruler of the ascendant are given the vegetative. So once again, this idea of vegetative, think of a plant. A plant essentially can grow, it can take in nourishment, and it can grow towards the light. And it can grow as per whatever its particular nature is, right? So poison ivy grows a certain way, roses grow a different way. And we can, both of those are ruled by completely different planets. They have completely different profiles as plants. So with the vegetative, we can say there is an inherent profile. We can say there is the ability to take in nourishment, and we can say there's the ability to, I should go backwards, shouldn't I? We can the ability to take in nourishment and the ability to grow. With the sensory, once again, the sensory is the sense, includes the senses and the appetite and the ability to move. And we have two planets that are considered appetitive, the moon and Venus. The moon is the representative of desire. So the moon and Venus can specifically represent our desires and our appetite. So sensory, locomotive, and appetitive, that's represented by the moon. And then rational, thinking and discrimination and perception, opinion, criticism, commentary, speech, problem solving, mastery, and skill. So what we're really looking at for divining the soul is on level 1, we're considering the condition of moon and Mercury. We're noting the signs they occupy. And then on the next level, we find the rulers of those signs. Any aspects involving all of the significators, right? So any aspects involving moon and Mercury, any aspects involving the planets who rule the signs that moon and Mercury are in. And then we also consider the angles and their lords for dividing the soul. Now we're gonna come to charts really quickly. And then this is a term that I brought up in the last, let's see, it's a term I brought up on Clubhouse last week when I talked about local determination. I don't know if you were there, but I talked about local determination. Local determination refers to the condition of a planet primarily by essential dignity, so that's strength by sign placement, accidental dignity, which is strength by house placement, house rulership, and aspects, right? And so that whole profile for the planet ends up showing us what we're looking at. So let's actually start with Mozart. So Mozart, of course, is considered one of the most important composers in the world, of all time. And one of the important things about Mozart's life was that it was highly controlled by his father. It was highly controlled by his father, and it was so controlled by his father that his father didn't really care for the person that he married, and it created an irreparable rift between them. The other thing that's interesting about Mozart is, for all of his genius and for all of his great reputation, after his death, he died very young, Mozart never did very well financially. He was never a wealthy person. He was never able to fully conform to the system of patronage that was in place for a musician during this era, during the 18th century, excuse me. He died in 1791. And so so there's a few themes, and obviously when we think about Mozart, we think music. So when we think about what may kind of revolve around this person's life purpose, it should involve some of these things, right? That I'm bringing up, some of these biographical issues that I brought up. So let's look. So the first thing we're going to look at is where is the ruler, not the ruler of the ascendant, the north node and the south node. And very interestingly enough, the north node and the south node are on the ascendant and the descendant. Now, one of the things that the north node is given, or that Rahu is given, is the unusual. He's given unusual and extreme appetite and unusual appetite. And Rahu is given the foreign. Rahu is given the unusual, the out of the ordinary, the bigger than life. And Mozart was very much that, very much an unusual person. May have actually been on the spectrum. You know, might have been a little bit autistic, but there was definitely something unusual about him. So that's just using it from a delineative perspective of just kind of what we know, or what I know about Rahu. But as far as looking at this as what is this person here to do, right? If we're looking at it from the Martin Shulman school of the north node and the south node, then we would be saying that the person has come here to work on this Mercury thing, and that the person brings with them this Pisces thing. So more than likely, okay, so the first thing we would do is we would look at the sign. So Virgo is the librarian of the zodiac, right? Virgo is the, reading and writing and arithmetic, like Mercury, right? Because Mercury rules all of those things. It's skill. So certainly that would be something that this would be important for this person to, shall we say, master in this particular lifetime. But the thing, in my opinion, is that this doesn't sound like there was a problem for Mercury at all. If you knew anything about for Mozart. If you know anything about Mozart, Mozart is the person who, when you look at his manuscripts, they are immaculate. They are immaculate. If you look at Beethoven's manuscripts are scrawled over. They're smashed, and he's done them again. He's ripped them up. It's just thing after thing after thing. The creative process is a real difficult process for Beethoven. For Mozart, he hears it in his head, and then he perfectly writes it down. So that sounds very Virgoan, right? That sounds quite Virgoan, but that doesn't sound like, in my opinion, something that this person has to go for in their life. So, or something that isn't, something that we can say isn't, what's the word I'm looking for? Isn't as developed. Because remember, Mozart is a composer, and composers write music. Right? Composers write music. Virgo is the sign of Mercury, and Mercury is the scribe. So, in my opinion, it looks like that's not really, or if there's anything, maybe there's a semantic issue. Maybe we're not talking about something that is what we're striving to do better, or what we're striving to embody. Maybe that's not what we're talking about. Maybe it is a marker. I mean, just looking at this chart in the moment, maybe it is a marker of what will happen. I don't know. I mean, I'm spitballing / speculating, because once again, we're investigating. I'm not making any pronouncements. I'm not making specific pronouncements. But what ends up happening is, as a result, we end up having a coincidence, because since it's Virgo rising, Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant, but we also know that Mercury is it's Mercury hour. Mercury hour just started. So we also know, though, that Mercury is one of the significators for the soul. So now we've got Rahu and Mercury connected. So as a result, we've got Rahu. Rahu is indicating Mercury. So Rahu is indicating the rational soul, is indicating the rational mind. That's the mind that solves the problems. That's the mind that shows the skill. That's the mind that shows the talent, right? That's able to show the talent to the world, express the talent to the world. And so what's interesting to me is, look at this. This Mercury is not particularly in the best of condition. It's not in the worst of condition, but it's not in the best. It's nighttime, so Mercury is the ruler of this air triplicity. But Mercury is combust. He's leaving, or they. We started using we've started using they. What is it? They them pronouns for Mercury, because Mercury is hermaphrodite and can be male or female. But in this chart, we can say Mercury is very much male, right? Because he's in a male sign. He's with the Sun, who's very much male, and he's with Saturn, who's also very much male. And he's also, and Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. The Sun is in detriment here. But so we've got a real kind of, shall we say, a seriousness of mind, especially when it comes to this writing, whatever this kind of scribing is around. There'd be a real seriousness of mind involved. And one of the things when you listen to Mozart, you know, when we listen to music from the classical period, it all seems very kind of simplistic and very maybe even trite. It can even seem trite. But when you listen to Mercury I keep calling him Mercury. When you listen to Mozart in comparison with other composers of the period, his music is head and shoulders above in breadth and depth, right? And the depth is the Saturn, profundity and depth. It seems on the surface, it seems so, it seems placid and it seems pleasing, and that maybe the range of it might not be so interesting. But really, when you put it in comparison with the other composers, he is a complete master in comparison. It's like listening to an Olympian god and listening to a mortal. And so I think there is an aspect of that here that's involved in this particular configuration. But even with this configuration, it implies some difficulty, right? Saturn gives us difficulty. And note that Saturn rules the 6th house of illnesses, right? And Mercury is right there on the cusp. So there could be some mental illness, or there could be some kind of mental issue. And right, we already know that the Rahu is here in the 1st house, and the 1st house rules the head. So the 1st house rules the head. Mercury, which also rules issues with our head. When we did our Mercury thing, we learned that almost all of the Mercury illnesses were brain injuries, mental illnesses, etc. So there may have been some kind of, once again, like I said, Mozart may have been autistic or had some kind of may have been neurodivergent. Let's put it that way. And then also notice how Mercury is here with both rulers. The daytime ruler for father is Sun. The nighttime ruler for father is Saturn. He's with both natural significators for the father. We already talked about that. And then also see how the moon, who's the other significator for soul, her next application is to Jupiter, who is the ruler of the 4th house. So in this particular chart, the coincidence, in my opinion, we can't necessarily make a judgment about whether or not the Rahu or the North Node gives us, because in this chart it does, because we know that as far as whether our particular thing works or the Rahu thing works, they're both connected in this chart. And on some level, it looks like them both being connected is showing something about Mozart's mental state, Mozart's mental divergence. He was extreme, he was raunchy and had no idea about social cues. He would make, I don't know if you ever saw Amadeus, but there's this great scene where he's pretending to play Salieri's music. And Salieri, it was another composer and a very, very successful composer and teacher. And Mozart never really got to be quite as well ensconced as Salieri, but Salieri was very, very jealous of Mozart's talent. And so he's playing this, pretending to play a Salieri piece, and he gets up off of the bench and starts to, does a fart as a punctuation. He was raunchy and had an uncouth and didn't understand social cues and said whatever he wanted to say. So he had a lot of the issues that may go with some form of spectrum-related behavior, which is also often typical for strong musicians. So there we have Mozart and the possibility. I want to look at Martin Luther King. And if you have questions or comments, you can either come off, or you can come off of your microphone, or you can put something in the chat. You're welcome to do that either way. So when I think about Martin Luther King, the thing that I think about is how Martin Luther King was essentially a love warrior. He was a warrior for, thank you. That Martin Luther King was a love warrior. And his main thing, and he was also an advocate for the downtrodden. Right? So he's all about peace and love, and at the same time, he's this advocate for the downtrodden. And he's also unafraid to face all kinds of animosity, and he's really like a general on some level. I mean, he's not, right? He's a man of God, right? So he's a minister, so he's representing God, but at the same time and here's of course the other things, using nonviolence, right? Fighting with nonviolence. So that's a major thing. The other thing we know about him is that he loved beauty. He loved beautiful women. So we know that. But we know that peace, love, togetherness, bringing up the downtrodden, we know that Martin Luther King went to India to learn satyagraha from the disciples of Gandhi, and to bring it back to the United States and use it as an aspect of the civil rights movement. So peace and love have to be in there. And so we can already see that if we use our own technique, and once again, if we use our own technique, the moon is here in the same sign with this exalted Venus. It's not just Venus, it's an exalted Venus. Venus is already the goddess of love. Venus is in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is peace and virtue, right? Peace and virtue, but Venus and Jupiter bring peace, right? They're the ones that bring peace and harmony. Jupiter is the peace, Venus is the harmony. So here we have the moon in a sign ruled by both, right? We're looking at our technique, which is first, which is the moon and Venus. Then when we look at Mercury, moon and Mercury. Then when we look at Mercury, notice how Mercury is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Mars, this Mars-Saturn opposition. Saturn, which is opposed by Mars. So there's our war. When you see Mars-Saturn opposition, when we had a Mars-Saturn opposition in 2000, two young boys walked into Columbine High School and killed many of their students. It's war. It's Mars-Saturn opposition is calamity and war. When you see it in the natal charts, it shows itself up somehow. So here we have it. And look, remember look at how this moon is right in the center, or not in the center, but she's applying to both of these planets. So we've got this moon T-squaring this Mars-Saturn. And notice how the moon is the ruler of the fourth house and the third in this chart. The fourth house is the country, is our country. And the third house would be the 12th from the fourth, which is the demon, the bad spirit of the country. And that is exactly what he fought. He fought the country's bad spirit. He fought the country's demon, which was the demon of racism and segregation and apartheid. So let us see what the notes say. Look at that. So once again, in my opinion, I think that we can make, it's only two charts, but based on these two charts, it looks like we can make a semantic distinction It is not. It does not look like the North Node is something that something that is new, that you have to embody. It looks like it's really more pointing to an inclination. In this chart, the inclination, and certainly the moon shows this as an inclination. The moon is what is alive within us, right? So the moon is already showing this as our internal inclination. Even if Venus weren't here, moon in Pisces, look, there's a mutual reception between Venus and Jupiter. So even without that Venus-Jupiter mutual reception, we would know that this Venus-Jupiter connection to the moon would incline the person to Venusian, Jupiterian character. And then also we know that the voice of this person, right? Because Mercury represents the voice, and Mercury represents the tongue and our speech. So the speech out of the words are coming. We just saw Aquarius, right? We just saw it with Mozart. We know that it's going to be dead serious. We know that it's not going to be frivolous. It's going to be deadly serious. And also, when we talked about Aquarius on Clubhouse and about how Aquarius tends to be how we organize culture for all of us, for the collective. So this person's voice is going to be voicing these concerns, and it's going to be voicing these concerns in opposition. Notice that the Mars is in Gemini. So it's going to be aggressive speech. So that, in my opinion, when I look at this North Node and I look at this South Node as what to leave behind. So maybe on some, but this isn't what to leave behind in the chart, right? This Mars in Gemini is really important. And notice this Mars in Gemini is really important to the way to look at Martin Luther King, because it's not just this prophetic Mercury in the 10th house, which makes perfect sense, right? This prophetic speech, this prophetic ability with speech that is part of the public reputation of this person, right? That makes perfect sense. But it also comes with the forcefulness, that's a Mars word, of the speech, the antipathy towards the status quo. Antipathy is a Mars word. The opposition to the status quo, that's a Mars word, right? So essentially what we have is somebody who basically put a stake in the ground and said it's not going any further. Because of course Rosa Parks brought that whole thing, brought the gauntlet down in 1955, and remember, he's only what, 26 or 27? Yeah, 1955, he's 26 years old and going down and doing this bus boycott. So the Mars, and so this aspect of the Mars Saturn is really a major part of the whole thing. So how can we say really that the South Node is what we already have and need to give up, and the North Node is what we need to kind of embody? No, it doesn't look like it. It looks like he needed to use this Mercury-Mars connection, or really it's this Moon-Mars connection. It's the Moon-Mars square. So he needed to be able to use that Moon-Mars square. This is why he was able to not back down, in my opinion. Because the Moon-Mars square, Mars is courage. So can we say that, so what, should we be saying that the South Node represents, he should not be holding on to courage? Because Mars is courage. That's one of the main things about, a negative Mars is it is a coward, and it goes to violence. The positive Mars is a protector who is valiant and shows courage. That's the essence of Martin Luther King. So feel free if you want to come off, the mute for a second and make a comment. What do you think? Do you want me to just go to another chart and just keep looking? What do you think with the last two that we just saw, based on what we know?
I do. I love it a lot. I think it's dope. I think I would like, though, if you could go over it one more time, as far as you're dividing the soul and what you're looking at specifically, because I'm interested. I am bought all the way in. I really enjoy the moon and Mercury that we're looking at, if I'm correct. And we're also looking at the ruling planet of the North Node specifically right now, but also the South Node. Did I cover everything?
Well, what's happened is you've covered the entire hodgepodge, right? So what I'm doing is I'm looking at both of our Rahu delineation technique and the medieval technique, trying to see which one I like better or which one I think works better. But as we can see with these two charts, they're intersecting, right? So that's what I'm finding really interesting. And with these two, and so as a result of the intersection, what I feel is happening is it's saying, hey, this arbitrary semantic distinction of, oh, the Rahu represents what we're here to do in this life, and the South Node represents what we're supposed to be eschewing or saying goodbye to. This chart doesn't support that, does it? Right? Could Martin Luther King leave behind the Mars-Saturn opposition? No, because that's what made, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, it even talks about oppositions in general, right? The one thing that I never could really grasp when it came to the nodes is that when it comes to oppositions in that aspect anyway, it's like, do I answer the door, or do I continue making sure that the baby goes to sleep? Like, you have to choose between which way you're going. It's either or. And the best way to deal with the opposition normally is to find whatever the point is that would create a T square, or find a balance between the two of them somehow so that you can find your way in the middle. To me, what you're saying is the North Node and the South Node, if you take what you have learned, if we're saying that the South Node is what you've learned from a past life, take what you have learned and also take what you need in this lifetime and do both. Is that what I'm hearing?
Maybe, or actually, while you were talking, something else came. Remember, Martin Luther King developed a concept of a philosophy of nonviolence. So maybe what we can say is that there's a refinement with what goes on with the South Node, because as a result of adopting nonviolence, he showed immense courage despite the nonviolence, right? So he's the essence of a courageous crusader. And so he's this courageous crusader, but he refuses to use retaliation and violence. Remember, we were just saying the negative Mars goes to violence, is a coward who needs violence. The positive Mars is a protector who is courageous. And so maybe it's an aspect of refinement that we're looking at with the South Node.
Yeah, I like that. I think Layla said something, so I won't say much longer. I won't say many more things, but yeah, I really do enjoy that. I like that refinement piece. I think that's what it is. Like, maybe, yeah, just refinement. I really do like that. I'm going to have to chew on. I'm going to go look at Mozart and even look at my own chart. Because
we've got more charts, and we'll come to yours. Yeah, believe me, we got more and more charts. We're here for 2 hours. Okay, I'm very happy. We got so many charts. And okay. So wait, let me see who all is here. Actually, let me just pause for a second.
It's just so fascinating. I never looked at nodes through that way.
Yeah, so isn't it? So yeah, let's look at some more.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
You said go to astro.com and upload it where?
And upload it to imgur.com.
IMGUR?
Uh-huh. imgur.com.
Okay.
Okay, here's Adolf Hitler. Now,
ooh, this is a good one.
Right? So I mean,
yeah.
So what will we, so one of the things that we can say, one of the main I'm going to say something different from what most people are probably going to say. One of the main kind of features of this life, in my opinion, is an inflated sense of self and megalomania that was supported by others, dangerously supported by others. And so that's one of the first things. The other thing, of course, is the malefic. This is a warmonger. This is a person. This is a destroyer. This is a destroyer's chart, right? This is a person who is responsible for the deaths of millions of people. And this is somebody who perceived themselves to be an artist. That I find really interesting too. So let's look at what we're looking at. Here's the South Node. Here's the North Node. North Node is in Cancer. Now, what was that? Okay, North Node in Cancer and in the 9th house. Now, the 9th house is the house of knowledge. It's also the part of fortune is there. So we can't pretend that it's not, that it doesn't really matter, right? We've already said we want to look at the sign that the North Node is in. We want to look at the house that it's in. So the sign that it's in, if you remember, one of the original text for not the sign, but the house for the 9th house is God. And what did I just say? This is a person who's got a megalomaniacal sense of self. Yep, thanks, Layla. Right, so this is a person who is, remember, people would say Heil Hitler. They wouldn't say hello, they would say Heil Hitler. So this is somebody who has a godlike sense of themselves, maybe. Right, so this idea of the megalomania is, in my opinion, really important. And so the 9th house with the Rahu there, and also with the part of fortune there, God is represented somehow. God is being, now also traditionally, like way back, the 9th house was the house of kingship, not the 10th. It's only in the medieval period that it moved to the 10th house. So for kingdom, for king, because the 3rd house was goddess and the 9th house was God. And note here how we have the moon in the 3rd. So what is the thing that when we think of a mother, and it's interesting because Layla and I were just talking about moon 2 weeks ago, and what are the things that need to be kind of shown when the moon is necessary, or when the moon's an important aspect. And the main thing I said is, obviously, the moon is both the tit and the stomach, right? So it's the breast that gives the milk, and it's the stomach that receives the nourishment. So that means that on some level, you have to be doing that as the mother, right? You have to be the mother of us all. You have to, which means a certain kind of welcome, a certain kind of hospitality, because remember the hospitality industry or food service is the moon. So a certain kind of care and empathy. So that would be a necessity. And also a certain amount of control over our emotional state and over what resides within us. Okay, so so if we're just looking at the moon, and we're just looking, and also if we're looking at the 9th house, traditionally the 9th house is called also the house of knowledge. And remember how interested in the occult the Nazi regime was, and Hitler especially. The house of knowledge, the house, and it's also the house. One of the questions that goes with the 9th house is, will the person be able to find the philosopher's stone? Remember, they were trying to make super soldiers. They were trying to find the Ark of the Lost Covenant. They were looking into all of the mysteries. But the moon as the ruler of the part of fortune, but the moon, the ruler of the nodes. It doesn't give us that much of an idea of this person. I mean, so I've just pulled out all of the things that I think. But look at the Mercury. Mercury is the tongue, remember? And Mercury is the voice and speech. And Mercury is right on the descendant, almost exactly opposing the ascendant. And here we have another mesmerizing speaker. So speech, and a mesmerizing, a bellicose speaker, right? There was a lot of warmongering in the speech. There was a lot of us versus them in the speech. There was a lot, right? Mars is war, Venus is harmony and peace, right? So in my opinion, we don't have the coincidence. We don't have the intersection. This shows, first of all, the bellicose speech and the ability of the speech to rouse the public, because the seventh house is the house of the public. Now, I don't tend to necessarily use, or rather, only with certain exceptions do I tend to use out of sign conjunctions, but we do know that the sun is combusting this Mercury, even if they're not what we would consider necessarily conjunct. But even if they're not, even if they were conjunct, the sun is pride, the sun is narcissism, the sun is this overweening pride and arrogance that I brought up. My issue, once again, what's the very first thing I said about Hitler? It's this inflated sense of self. There's Moon and Jupiter inflates, right? There's this inflated sense of self, and there's all of these people, all of these sycophants who helped it to grow, right? Who, kind of in the same way that this other demagogue that we know, Donald Trump. So this is a demagogue's chart, right? This is a demagogue's chart, and demagogues talk shit. Demagogues have bellicose speech. Demagogues split everything between us and them. This is a false man of the people, right? There's the rational soul on the seventh house, pretending to represent the people. And then, of course, the moon is the other aspect of the soul. So guess what? We do have another intersection. We have another intersection. Because we have the two, and of course, what did I say? Jupiter inflates, and the moon is what's involved. The moon is what's alive within us. So that would be, so our sense of self would be both, of course, the sun and the moon, and the ruler of the ascendant, obviously. So the ruler of the ascendant. But note that the moon is in detriment. Right, but with Jupiter. So whatever is not good about the moon can get bigger. Right, so with something like this, we would think, oh, well, maybe the Jupiter might help it. But notice that the Jupiter is fallen. So the moon is in detriment, the Jupiter is in fall. Both of them are close to the south node, which we know impedes planets. So any ability to show compassion, that's a Jupiter word too. Moon and Jupiter are both the rulers of Cancer. So welcome, compassion, empathy, all of those types of things that go with those, both of those planets overlap with those kinds of issues. Thank you, Seven, got it. Right? So as a result, now looking at this, we see that the moon doesn't really have a chance to do it. The moon doesn't really have a chance to flow in a good way. The Jupiter doesn't have a chance to turn the moon into a benefic partner. And notice that the Jupiter rules the sixth house, right? That's bad fortune. So Jupiter rules 2, he rules 5, and he rules 6 in this chart. So he's not ruling things that are going to make him even necessarily inclined to be good. He might rule things that incline him. Right, we're going to come to that in a second. Yes, Layla, so we're going to come to the fact that Saturn is in detriment. Because I think that, you remember when we saw Ted Bundy's chart? I brought his chart again. And I think that this Saturn in Leo can be extremely misanthropic. It can be a people hater. And we saw It really can. It's really important because remember, Aquarius is the opposite sign, and that's civilization. Oh, as a matter of fact, Leo is a feral sign and a sylvan sign. So sylvan means of the forest. And of course, feral is wild. So we've got the feral sylvan Leo opposing the organized civilization of Aquarius. That's the real traditional opposition of those two signs. Right? So that's really what that's about. Feral Leo versus how we civilize ourselves, how we've decided, how we've agreed to all civilize ourselves. So, as you mentioned, indeed, the moon is ruled by the Saturn, the Mercury is ruled by Mars. Okay, so now look at here. Both the Venus is the ruler of the ascendant. Note that Venus is about to come to the exact partile conjunction of the Saturn, at which point she will then also translate the light from Mars to Saturn. I'm sorry, she's going to go conjunction to the Mars, and then she's going to translate to Saturn. So this Venus is about to enter, within 23 minutes, she's about to enter besiegement. She will be besieged by both the Saturn and the Mars. Note that the Venus is in her own sign, but the Mars is detrimented and the Saturn is detrimented. So the Mars is detrimented, the Saturn is detrimented, the moon is detrimented, the Jupiter is detrimented. And so as a result, remember that the planet that rules the first house is the person themselves, right? Along with the moon. So we've got this moon who can't really find her flow, with a Jupiter who can't really find his virtue, with this South Node that keeps everything in the gutter, right? Because Capricorn can get raunchy and guttery. Then we've got the Mercury, who's directly opposing the ascendant, who really is broadcasting this system, Venus, Mars, Saturn. Even though the Mars is separated from the Saturn, the Venus is going to bring his life back to it. So in this particular chart, it looks like what this person may have needed was compassion. This person needed to be Mother India. Instead, he was the father of terror. Right? He needed to be the benefic mother of the country. Instead, he became this figurehead of terror for the country. And note also that Mercury is the ruler of the 8th house of fear and terror, right? And there it is, right, coming forward right on the aspect. So if we were to see, we know Saturn can be cruel, Saturn can be cold, right? Exactly. So great influence in a negative way. Saturn can be cold and mean. Saturn can be judgmental. Saturn can pick nits and separate wheat from chaff. So Saturn can do all of those things. So it's as a result of, we can say, of the moon and Jupiter being under this really, really negative influence of Saturn, and not just Saturn, but Mars square Saturn, right? So we had a Mars opposing Saturn in the Martin Luther King chart. We've got this Mars square Saturn now that the Venus is going to be bringing them into connection. So we can say, so it's looking like, yes, indeed, the Rahu and Ketu do have something to do with what it is we're here to do and what we do about it. But maybe once again, there's this process of refinement. In the Hitler chart, we can see that he did not undergo that process. Right? The Ketu was in Capricorn with the moon and the Jupiter, and the Ketu just kept it all in the gutter, in the muck. Interesting. Okay, so Billie Holiday, one of my all-time favorite people in the world ever, and the reason that I became a singer and not an actor. And Billie Holiday, of course, is known for her drug addiction. Billie Holiday is known for basically being for her criminality, for criminality. She's known for being a junkie. She's known for having gone to jail. Matter of fact, she's known for having been in and out of institutions, for having been institutionalized, starting when she was, I think, maybe 11 or 12, when she was caught. Her mother was a prostitute, and she was caught soliciting as a preteen, sent to a reform school, and that's when she became a Catholic. And then they moved to New York, and she started singing in clubs, etc. And so Neptune in the first, or Neptune opposing the first, or almost, or but yes. So all of these interesting things, and one of the things, Seven, you're new with me, but one of the things that I've seen in a lot of charts is Venus-Jupiter connections. Venus-Jupiter connections being indicative of too much of a good thing, right? Because Jupiter is a lot and Venus is what we enjoy. So Jupiter-Venus can often be addiction that starts with us enjoying something too much. We enjoy it so much that because Jupiter also tends to be encroachment and running over boundaries, because we, expanding the boundaries, because we enjoy it so much. And so I've seen often in people's charts that there's too much of a good thing. There's a place that when I see Venus Jupiter, I often think, what part of their life is out of control? So even though we've got these two benefics together, it's the combination of the two benefics that can bring a lack of balance and an extreme behavior. So we have addiction in this chart with this person. We've got bad choices in relationships. So difficult marriages, right? So overindulgence, yes, overindulgence. I think that's very Jupiterian term, right? So indulges Venus, overindulges Jupiter and Venus, right? So we've got problems with marriage and attracting abusive people. We've got sexual license. We've got sexual freedom, and I won't say immorality, but we've got a traversing of sexual mores. We've got a traversing of other kinds of conventional mores through drug use, through illicit drug use. We've got incarceration and jail. And then we've got incandescent talent, and a talent that changes history. So let's look at what we're looking at. So the first thing that I see is the Rahu in the first, and we've already talked about finding the Rahu in the first and how that can be an indicative of some kind of unusual behavior, right? Or us thinking in unusual ways or doing things in unusual ways. And not only do we have that, but we've got the Uranus in the first house, right? And that's already about breaking down barriers and revolutionizing and those kinds of things. So it's important to understand that the two most important singers of the 20th century, non-classical singers of the 20th century, and the two singers that really pointed the direction that all of us as Americans would sing from then on are Louis Armstrong, and even more so, Billie Holiday. We talk a lot about singers in these because I was a singer, and I always say Ella Fitzgerald is maybe the greatest singer of the 20th century, but Billie Holiday is the singer that said, hey, we don't need to look across Louis Armstrong, but really Billie Holiday is the one that says we don't have to look across the Atlantic to see how we're singing anymore. Now we sing like this. And I once met a woman who sang for one of the old big bands back in the early 40s. She was in her 70s in the 80s. And I remember asking her, oh, so who were some of your favorite singers? And we were talking, and I said, oh, what about Billie Holiday? This was a white lady, mind you. So she had sung with the white swing bands. She didn't sing with the black bands. And she said, everybody copped her phrasing. Cops means copy. She goes, oh, everybody copped her phrasing. Everybody copied her phrasing, was what she said. Oh, Billie Holiday, everybody copped her phrasing. So let's look. So we know that we've got a one-of-a-kind person. right? So the individuality of Billie Holiday is one of the most important characteristics. So we already can see that from the Uranus and from the Rahu in the first house, that there's going to be a singularity about the person. And also remember, Rahu is called the agent of ambition. And notice we saw Rahu in the first house in Mozart's chart. We saw Rahu in the first house of Martin Luther King's chart. We saw Rahu in the first house of Billie Holiday's chart. So in all of these cases, there's this agent of ambition towards whatever it is that they want to do. And so, but that would make Saturn, right? It's in Aquarius. And so, oh, what did I just say about how Billie Holiday changed the way the culture started to sing? So we can see some of that. But on an individual level, right? On an individual level, like how would this be indicative of Billie Holiday? So one of the things about Saturn is limitations and caution, right? Saturn is not abandoned. Saturn is limitation, right? Jupiter or Mars can be the abandoned, just kind of going with the flow, or the abandoned, right? Jupiter going with the flow, there's Pisces, right? But Saturn isn't. Saturn tends to take baby steps. Saturn goes slowly. Saturn is cautious, right? So maybe what this chart was saying, maybe this North Node was saying, hey, there needs to be a discipline or a caution. That there needs to be a way of integrating discipline or caution. The opposite of that. Oh, and remember, we just talked about the opposite of Leo being feral and wild, right? And civilized, structured and civilized is Aquarius. And we can certainly say that a person that falls off the rails into drug. Now, I mean, I love my weed. I've tried all kinds of drugs. I'm not having any kind of judgment against. I mean, I don't love it. I'm not really into heroin and the opiates myself. But I'm not into judging people. But we do know that people are judged by these particular things, and we do know also that addiction is the opposite of discipline. Right? It's the opposite of the Saturnian. Now, the Saturnian, a Saturnian-like depression, can lead us to becoming an addict, right? And so that's a possibility. So there could be a possibility of how depression or issues not dealt with that are depressive in nature. She had been raped as a child. She had dealt with all kinds of hardship. She had been prostituting for most of her since she was 11 or 12. So she'd been turning tricks for all that time. She'd been smoking weed and drinking hard since she was 13 or 14. So we know often when people self-medicate, they're dealing with something else. So it could be around whatever kind of depressive issues were there that would lead us to needing to do something like that. And then, of course, knowing that the South Node, the unrefined aspect of the person, is this wildness, is this feral nature. They talk about Billie Holiday taking on two sailors because one sailor had put out a cigarette on her fur coat, and she said, "Hold this," and she took them outside and she beat their fucking asses. So that there's a feral nature. There's stories of her husband walking in and finding her in bed with two women. There's a feral nature to Billie Holiday. Along with the moon in the the moon in the 12th, right, and another detrimented moon, right? So we have here maybe a person that isn't good at dealing with their issues. Also, we're coming from a time period when people didn't really look at their issues, right? From the 30s, she was in her 20s, in the early 30s, in the mid 30s, so that's a period when there wasn't a lot of self-reflection. The kind of the Freudian Jungian way of looking at things was new. People didn't really believe in therapy and that kind of thing. It wasn't as people. So I would say that this would be the kind of character who would escape. This is an escapist character. Look at all these planets in Pisces. And look at how the planets in Pisces are squaring the chart ruler, who is Saturn. So there's no overlap in this chart. So let's look. There's no overlap. So we've got the moon, as you said, in the 12th house. 12th house is the house of the jail, right? 8th house is the house where you're incarcerated. 12th house is the house of the jail. So there's the 8th house ruler applying to the ruler of the first. And here's the 12th house ruler applying to the ruler of the 8th. So, or rather, here's the planet in the 12th house, and the planet that rules the 12th also rules the first. So we've got the first and the 12th. So this is already a chart that has to deal with difficulties, that has to deal with processing difficulties. And it looks like what would happen if this chart is that if they didn't process through their difficulties, they would lose their mooring. They'd lose their mooring and go into wildness. And we know that the way that they would go towards wildness would be to descend into sensation and to escape into sensation, into some form of escapism. And we know also here with the Venus-Jupiter that the Venus-Jupiter represents too much of a good thing. So it could be very possible that the escape would be some kind of, would be addictive in nature. Or it could, now the music could have been an addiction as well. It's one of mine. But so that's, so, you know, I started with this thinking, you know, I'm starting with this being skeptical about the whole Rahu Ketu thing, or not the Rahu Ketu thing, because I love jyotish and I've accepted it. I've accepted Rahu and Ketu and jyotish, but I didn't really accept the North Node, South Node thing with the in modern astrology. But what I'm seeing as we're looking at things is that this is showing us a way, in my opinion, or showing me a way that I can accept it. And that, of course, if indeed there is a karmic aspect to them, why shouldn't it translate over? Right? Why shouldn't it translate over into what we're looking at? So note that the Rahu in this chart is also ruled by the ruler of the ascendant. So Pope Alexander VI is also known as the Borgia Pope. And he is also the father, and you're going to say father? He's also the father of one of the famous femme fatales of history, Lucrezia Borgia. So Pope Alexander VI is also Rodrigo Borgia, and he had two illegitimate children, Cesare and Lucrezia. He was purported to be having an incestual relationship with Lucrezia. And there's supposed to be an eyewitness account of a party at the Vatican, where at the very end of it, he embraces her in an extremely inappropriate way, and everybody is horrified. So what we have, but this person became the vicar of Christ. This person became Pope. And he is one of the Renaissance popes. So he's one of the line of popes who basically, with their kind of atrocities and their different outrages that they created throughout Europe, basically brought along the GOT did not prepare me for this. And they also, this Pope and the Pope after him, the two popes after him, they basically brought along the Lutheran Revolution. Martin Luther, the reason that Martin Luther put those 99 theses on the door of the cathedral in Wittgenstein is because of the bullshit that was going on with the popes. Essentially, they were acting like regular monarchs. So this person became king. This person became a monarch, became king. What I think is so interesting about this chart, and the chart of quite a few popes that I see, is the ruler of the 10th is in the 9th. But one of the things that we learned when we were looking at the ninth house is that the ninth house, that Mars is the ruler of descent. He's the ruler of pilgrimage, but he's also the ruler of descent. And so looking at this chart, I think it's quite clear that this person didn't really believe in God. Back then, going into the church was a way that almost any person could rise in station. And Alexander, and this particular pope, is only one of 2 Spanish popes in the entire history of the papacy. The first one was his uncle. So that's an important thing to kind of think of, the whole nepotism aspect of almost everything back then, but especially the papacy. So when we kind of think of these popes as being kind of holy people, but they weren't. They really weren't. They were monarchs. They were monarchs, and because remember, when Constantine left Rome, he basically left the administration of Rome to the papacy, and so they took over the vacuum that the administration of the empire left when they went to Constantinople. So this is kind of the ultimate decay of the papacy. And so the things that Pope Alexander did was he created all kinds of wars. He got involved in all kinds of wars for different territories. He poisoned people. He had people murdered. He had this gorgeous, beautiful mistress. So we're basically talking about a highly immoral man of God. We're talking about a famous hypocrite. We're talking about a hypocrite here. And look at how once again, we've got another fucking Rahu in Aquarius. Another Rahu in Aquarius. We've been seeing a lot of this. I guess maybe we can, with some of these people who have more serious, maybe when we get to somebody like you and me, where we don't have as serious a life purpose, so to speak, then we may not see this. But it's interesting how many of these charts where we've seen an Aquarius Rahu. So we see the ruler of the ascendant on the ascendant, combust, but combusted by the planet that represents God and religion, and represents fear and terror and war. And this pope and the pope after him were 2 of the most war hungry, and 2 of the most, basically the ones fighting over, were he and Julius II, who followed him, and they were arch enemies, they were fighting war after war all over Europe. As a matter of fact, Julius II led many armies in war, and the people of Christendom, people of Europe, were amazed at this idea of the Pope leading an army. The Pope, what the hell is the Pope supposed to do leading an army? These men lived in all kinds of luxury and wealth, and while people starved, and so when we see a chart like this, makes me kind of wonder. So, and notice once again, the Saturn is in Capricorn. Remember that Capricorn is a licentious sign, so it can go to the gutter. It can go to the gutter. Cancer, there is no raunch. Scorpio can be sexual. Capricorn will take it further down. Scorpio might take it to the gutter, but Capricorn will rototill that shit all the way down to the cesspool. Seriously, Capricorn. I have Sun in Capricorn. I know how raunchy I can be. I know how raunchy my other Capricorn people can be. As a matter of fact, I met this guy years ago, and we were just hanging out at this party talking. He goes, "Oh yeah, what's your sign?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm Capricorn." He goes, "Capricorn, you a freak." So that's kind of so. And what are we talking about? We're talking about a libertine. We're talking about somebody who might. We're talking about somebody who might have been having sex with their own daughter. We're talking about somebody, and once again, it's how civilized or how feral are you, right? How civilized or how feral? How much have you refined this? And notice, Leo is a sign that's ruled by the sun, who represents God and religion. This is the thing that needs refinement, right? And it's in the 8th. It's not in the 9th house, it's in the 8th. right? So he used religion to terrorize the country. I mean, he didn't terrorize the country in the same way that Hitler did, but certainly this person was much more interested in power, raw power, right? Raw power. They say what power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Pope Alexander VI is very, very much an example of that. Raw power corrupting. Oh yes, and the K2 on Regulus. And you know what? The Regulus might have been even earlier, right? He was born in 1430, right? So the Regulus might have been, because remember, Regulus was called what? Cor Leonis, heart of the lion. So probably when it was Cor Leonis, it was around 15. That was probably, we could probably say maybe the Cor Leonis is at 23, 24, maybe 25. It's not at 29. Or maybe 28, 27. But I doubt it's at 29. But still close. Still close. Excellent point. Okay, let's move on. Let's actually, let's see, who else do we have? I've got the other charts. I've got I'm going to do one more. Shall we, dignitary, and then I'm going to do one more dignitary, and then we'll get to your charts and the study charts. So this is a porn dignitary. This is the first gay porn superstar, Jeff Streicher. We looked at him last week, but I wanted to look at his chart from the idea of what we're looking at. And what do we see here? We see the opposite thing going on here. Rahu's in Leo, and K2 is in Aquarius. And look at who's there with him. Saturn is there with him. This person became the superstar. So made lots of money through porn, became extremely well known, did cameos on different television shows and different things, became kind of a household name in the 90s. Pictures on covers of all of the porn things he was in and the porn magazines, became really the kind of the king of porn, basically, the king of gay porn, certainly at this time. And there were other guys who had been king of porn before that, but this guy's advent comes with the advent of the multimedia marketing, and so he became this marketing phenomenon. So this person's life has been around sex. One of the interesting things about him is that he never portrayed an image of romantic sexuality with men or women, but especially not with men. It was almost always as kind of like a rough top, a little bit demeaning, very verbal, always a very verbal and very dominant. That was he was never like a lovey, kissy, huggy, deep tongue kissing, because that was the period when almost all of the gay porn actors were gay. Nowadays, almost all the men in gay porn are gay for pay. And so you got to see really enthusiastic gay sex. And this particular actor was one of the least enthusiastic. He was one of the more stilted, which I never understood. I never actually really liked Jeff Streicher, but he was one of the least kind of giving of himself sexually, and we can see that here. So we can see that there was a coldness to Jeff Streicher, so that a coldness that he didn't refine, but that what he did was use it as a part of his image. We see that the sun is not necessarily with the Rahu, but the sun is in the same sign, and yes, close to Regulus. So that's certainly a factor for why this person maybe got as far as they did, and that their image, for their own specific image, got as far as it did. Right? So so we've got the excessive heat of the sun, and we've got the excessive cold of Saturn. But we've got the excessive cold of the Saturn opposing the Rahu. So that, in my opinion, has a lot to do with the coldness that he portrayed, the power dynamic, the constant power dynamic, because he had a baby face. Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant. Mercury is youth. He was a pretty boy, Venus on the part of fortune, with a baby face. And he wasn't particularly tall, but he never, ever showed vulnerability. He was always in charge, and almost always the scenes included lots of verbal domination. And of course, domination is Saturnian. So here we've got, so maybe we can even, instead of saying this is something the person brought in from the past, it's like the person didn't need to necessarily refine this characteristic. They made it emblematic of how they did their thing, and it worked for them, right? It might not have worked for somebody else. And as I said, I never liked him for this very matter. You know, there were guys that would kiss. There were guys that would do all the other stuff. This guy would sit and talk dirty, you know, would stand and talk dirty at you and talk and you know, and call you all kinds of names. And, you know, some of us like that too. However, that was a little bit different than what we were used to kind of seeing fully all the time. That was the kind of character he naturally was inclined to adopt. So I find that kind of interesting. And with this Rahu in Leo, it looks like instead what he did, like I said, was integrate the Saturn into this, so that this coldness, you know, so that even though he was, you know, inexplicably hot, right? That's a term that we use for attractive men, hot. This guy was really hot, but there was this deep kind of coldness and dominance and severity underneath it as well. Huh, that's interesting. Okay, what other, so before I get to you guys, what other observations do we have? Or shall I just go on? Nothing? Okay. Feel free whenever. All right, so now let's find, oh, here we go. Okay, now we're going to look at a regular person, or so far. Okay, so Capricorn Cancer is the Rahu nodes. So first of all, let's find, oh, look at Moon and Mercury are together. Oh, this is Layla. Okay, so Moon and Mercury are together and with Mars. So we know this, I know this chart well. Hold on a second, and then I'm also going to get hers so that when we're ready. So we could say, now I know, so first of all, one of the things that we know about, that I know about Layla, you know, Layla's been with me for a while, but even just looking at it, what we could see is that the mind is featured in this chart. Mercury and the Moon are both aspects of the mind, right? The Moon is the non-rational, the Mercury is rational. The first house represents the head. So we know already that as far as this person's soul is concerned, it's mind and the issues with mind the issues that go with this person's mind. Now, what we also see is that the significators for the soul and the mind are with Mars, right? 20 degrees of Sagittarius coming to 25. And so we know that there should probably be an assertiveness when it comes to that. Yeah, definitely do that. Yeah, no, you don't need to put your info in it. We just clear it up, or if you just clear it or erase it or scratch it out or something. So I'll actually get rid of that, and then you can go ahead and send me another link when you're ready. Okay, so using our technique, Moon and Mercury, and then the planet that rules it, and notice how Jupiter, the planet that rules Sagittarius, is in Virgo. So it brings us back to Mercury. So really, Mercury is the primary indicator of the soul in this chart, which makes perfect sense. The tongue, the brain, the mind, the rational mind. This person is a talker. This person is a thinker. This person might talk too much, right? Because Mercury is in the first house. So this person's thoughts will come very quickly to them and may come quickly to their tongue because Mercury rules the tongue. But we also know that Mars has a tendency to be rash, right? Mars is rashness. Mars is rushing. So this person may have a tendency to not think before they speak. So rashness in speech is a major aspect of this chart. So now what we're looking for is what's going on. What do the Rahu and Ketu indicate? And notice that Rahu is in Capricorn and Ketu is in Cancer. So Rahu is ruled by the Saturn that's in his own sign, and Venus is sextiling, is approaching by sextile. So this is pointing to something different, right? This isn't pointing specifically to what we just talked about, right? The moon and the Mercury are pointing to this person's mind, really specifically pointing to this person and to their speech, to mind and speech. And as a result of mind and speech, what kind of befalls them. And especially since Mars is involved, there should be issues, there should be problems, there should be opposition, there should be what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's not opposition. Yeah, there should be opposition. There should be friction, right? So the mind, this person's mind and this person's speech should cause friction, and they should be assertive in that speech, right? So that should be a major aspect of everything. And notice how the Rahu is in the first house. So that does indicate the head, but it's in Saturn's sign. So Saturn is, look, we've got all this stuff in Aquarius. It's so interesting. So many things going on with Aquarius. So Saturn's in Aquarius. We've been talking ad nauseum about Aquarius and about how Aquarius is how we organize and civilize ourselves, right? It's what we agree on to civilize ourselves. And we also have Venus here. So Venus is also how we ingratiate ourselves. So what I would actually say about what this chart, what the Rahu Ketu thing is actually saying, because notice that the moon rules the Ketu. So what needs refinement is the part of the mind that isn't easily controlled. It's the part of mind where the thoughts come from, right? Mercury is the thoughts put into some kind of organized way of communication. The moon is where the thoughts come from, right? And in this chart, moon and Mercury, see, I was thinking, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with either of those, but it does. There's the intersection. This time, the intersection is on the south node. And so that's what needs refinement, is this person's thinking and speaking, so that they can be more ingratiating. So this is a problem for this. This has been a problem for this person, because the mentation and the thinking leads to conflict, where the Rahu is basically asking them to make themselves more harmonious by civilizing and refining their speech and thinking. Isn't that something? Layla, what do you want to say? What do you want to say to that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, but the thing is, whenever I have tried, I think we discussed this before as well, but whenever I've tried being harmonious, being this really non-aggressive person, being like not threatening, but like what's the word that I'm looking for? Nurturing sort of way. I'm walked all over. Like it just doesn't work for me. And then I feel like I'm not being authentic, and I just hate feeling like that. So this is something really interesting, and yeah, I need to think over this.
It is interesting because, once again, like I said, because the thing is, we know that all your life people have given you shit for being too smart and talking too much. Okay, so that's right. But from this, it's looking like this Venus-Saturn is the obligation of the Rahu. You see what I'm saying? The Venus-Saturn is the obligation of the Rahu. If that's what we're, looking at every other chart that we've just looked at, it's all kind of shown us what this person can kind of do already. So this is something you can do already. But maybe it's not specifically about ingration. Maybe it's not so much about trying, because your moon is conjunct Mars, right? So this is a tough love mommy. This is a tough love mommy. This isn't the thousand breasts, full of milk mommy. This is tough love mommy. And right, this is tough love mommy. Recite your multiplication tables right now, mommy. Right? Moon is between Mercury and Mars. Right? So what's the definition? How do you spell blah blah blah? What's 12 times 12? But that's this kind of mother. So I think, first of all, I think that you're not being authentic if you try to be too nurturing, or you try to be nurturing in a conventional way. But Venus-Saturn, now remember, Saturn cools Venus down. And look at the signs Venus and Saturn are in: Sagittarius and Aquarius. So it's really about how we communicate what it is we know. So it might not be, so maybe this kind of mommy needs to be not so much what's 12 times 12, but so do you remember? So now do you remember what 12 times 12? It needs to be an encouraging. There needs to be an encouraging feminine. You need to be nurturing. You need to be encouraging. You don't need to be nurturing. You need to be inspiring. The Venus in Sagittarius needs to, because she's interested in disseminating ideas, and she's interested in creating harmony through that.
Yeah.
Right. So think about us. Think about us, you and I. We have a very good harmony, and it's about how we, one, agree in the ideas that we work with, how when you encounter with something, I'm able to come, that it's never done in any kind of combative way. There's never any combativeness nature between us. It's always super harmonious, but it's always reams of information being distributed between us.
Ah, got it. Yeah.
In my opinion, our relationship is the emblem for this Venus-Saturn thing for your Rahu.
Yeah.
Right. It's how how you can build community with it, how you can build relationships with it. That's so.
Yeah, be assertive, but within, like, not in a threatening or not in a militant kind of way, but don't lose your assertiveness at the same time. Yeah.
Right. So that you found the kind of like what I said before when we finished the medieval class, which was, hey, now you all have each other, and now you all have each other. You all can be helping each other too, and you now have a community of people that are all involved with the same kind of information, and that may be a way that you haven't previously looked at things, that you haven't looked at how your ability to see, how your love for certain types of information can bind you to others. Because no, Mars is the ruler of the 11th house, honey.
Oh, this is the wrong chart. Mars would be the ruler of the 12th. This was before we did the midheaven thing. So Mars is actually the ruler of the 12th for me.
Oh, it is?
This was before we, this was before we fixed it for the midheaven thing, remember?
But isn't this your the new chart with the 23 degrees of Sag?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mars
it
rules.
is. But
Mars
Mars rules the 12th.
Yeah, Mars
Yeah,
rules the 12th
but
and the 11th in this one.
but remember we did the midheaven thing where we figured out if my midheaven would be Libra or Virgo, and then we figured out that it would be Virgo and not Libra. So
Oh,
if Virgo would be my midheaven,
Got
Yeah.
it. Okay. Well, then that's even more interesting, because if Mars is the ruler of the 12th, then we know the assertiveness is a problem. The assertiveness is a constant problem, right? The 12th house,
okay.
it's self-undoing. The 12th house is self-undoing. So, and that's why you've always been met with issues around it.
Yeah. And Venus
So-
would be my ruler of 11th. Yeah.
Right, and so she's there in the 12th. She's there in the 12th, trying to kind of,
Yeah.
trying to sort it out. So, as I said, so there's the 11th. So then there is the 11th involved with it.
Yeah.
There's the 11th.
Yeah,
involved.
that's how.
So I stand by what I said. It's just different planets. That,
Exactly. I
bring
need to
it-
be more Venusian and less Martian.
Well, but in context, you can. But
In context, yeah, of course.
You're able to be Venusian when you're involved with the right information.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The more involved you are with the right kind of knowledge, the more. Oh, this came up for. She sent me another one. The more Venusian, the more you are with the knowledge, the more Venusian you are, because the more you'll seek relationship with others based on that knowledge.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Puts me into more context.
All right, here we go now. So let's see. Now, look, we've got Mercury right on the ascendant. And once again, we have another person. I've got Mercury on the ascendant. And your Mercury's on my part of fortune. She's got Mercury on the ascendant her Mercury and Moon are on my Mercury. And then I've got the Mercury on the ascendant in Sagittarius. Matter of fact, on her ascendant, on Layla's ascendant, my Mercury is on her ascendant. Her Mercury is on my Mercury. And now your Mercury is on my part of fortune. So we're all family here, definitely. Okay, so and look, you got Mars at 20 degrees of Sag. So you're definitely family. There's got to be something in like 20 or 21 degrees of Sagittarius for you all to be part of the Garthastro family. And sure enough, you've got it.
Yeah.
And note, your Mars is within 5 degrees of Layla's Mars. Okay, so you've got.
Yay!
So we are family. Okay, so.
We need a theme song now.
Very, very happy about that.
Yeah, totally. So am I. So what really? So the first thing that I'll just kind of show some of my impressions, kind of about my first impression of you on last Sunday was how well organized your speech was around the information you knew, and what an excellent reference. How well referenced your statements were, how clear that you had used certain resources. That's all Virgo, because Virgo is the library.
Yeah.
Everything about, which is why I was so impressed with you, because you were so scholastic about what you were talking about. And I immediately was like, who is that? There were some other people, there were some other people who are like, oh, that person knows a lot. But when you talk, I was like, who is that? Who's talking? And, and every time, you brought up something that was in text, you brought up something that I had read. That was the other reason I loved you so much, because you brought up stuff that I had read. You said, oh, well, there's this blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, go ahead, this thing. I read that too. And yes, it is this. And then and you would say something else. I'm like, oh shit, I read that too. Go for it. So already we've got this scholastic approach to life, not just knowledge, but to life, because it's the ruler of the ascendant and the 10th. The 10th house is called praxis, or action. So this person really wants to take action through kind of knowledge and referencing and resources, and it's not just book learning. It's how do I find a resource to live my best life? how do I find a resource to, it's how do I find a resource to make my life flourish? Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, where's
efficient.
But yes, an efficiency and a refinement already, right? So efficiency and refinement are already kind of part of the Mercury thing. And so this person is continuously efficiency oriented. How can I make it more refined? How can we, like, so for instance, when we started this today, you kept going, I love it, I love it. And why? Because what are we doing? We're digging into it. We're investigating. We're getting rid of what we don't want. Which, right? Mercury, Virgo rules the digestive system, where everything goes to its proper place, right? And so we're getting rid of the nutrients that aren't necessary. We're putting the right book on the right shelf. We've decided what we've decided what all the semantic distinctions are going to be. That's Virgo, right? So that's what this chart is really preoccupied with. Ruler of the ascendant, exalted ruler of the ascendant on the ascendant. So that's lovely and delicious. Notice though that the Mercury is applying to the square. Well, the sextile to Saturn and the square to the, matter of fact, she just left the sextile to Saturn and she's about to go to the square to Mars. So this is a deep thinking person, and this is a person who uses their mentation in a very, can use it in a very disciplined way, but maybe there have been some issues in the home that have been issues, right? Because this is the parents, and Mars is there, and so is Jupiter in the fall. So there may be problems with the father, or there may have been some kind of issues. There, sometimes I know sometimes in African American culture there can either be a fetishization of education, or there can be a combativeness towards it if one of the children is smarter than the rest of the family or shows an aptitude. So there could be that. The latter, this could be the latter in this particular case, where you being the smart one might have created problems in the family. Yes, is that? Oh, that sounds like yes. Okay.
With my dad specifically. So.
Okay, so there we have it, right? So, all right. So we've got it. So that's one of the purposes for being in this chart, right? So that's one of the purposes. One of the purposes in this chart is to excel mentally and be blocked and be challenged by the father. Okay, so that's one of the purposes. So we've got that based on the Mercury that we know is one of the indicators for the soul. So one of the soul purposes is what you're dealing with your dad. The other one is this moon in Leo in the 11th house, and it's ruled by the sun in the first. So same thing, sun is in Virgo. So same thing. This person, it's still bringing us back to the Mercury. So that the Mercury in this chart is also the soul indicator for the soul, or the primary indicator for the soul, even though it's Mercury and the sun, which means that this Mercury Mars is the feature of the main feature of the soul for this chart, which means that it will be this should be a continuous thing. It will be, you will, and you know what, actually, you even brought it up. You brought it up in a different way. It's showing up as you're being surrounded by, it shows up as you're being surrounded by modern astrologers when you don't really represent that viewpoint.
Right.
Because the square is a challenge. It's not full opposition. It's a challenge. You can work with it. You can work through it. You're time enough, and you can adapt.
I like it.
Right. You even like it. You can even adapt, right? Because the mutable signs are the most adaptable, and Mercury is stable and convertible. So you can even adapt, but it still creates a tension. It still creates a friction rather, where your type of knowledge isn't fully 100% welcome, or doesn't feel 100% welcome, and it becomes a residue of the experience with the father. So now let's look and see if what the Rahu Ketu is indicating, because we saw that the Rahu Ketu was indicating something different. First of all, are the moon or Mercury involved? No, they are not. It's Venus and Mars. So the Venus is it's Venus and Mars. Mars is in the fourth house. Remember, it's this Mars in the fourth house that actually, that was what led me to believe that it was a problem with your father not liking your how smart you are. Okay, but it's not the ruler of the fourth, but it's the planet in the fourth. So it's the planet that rules the third and the eighth. So it's the planet in the. Wait, do you have a sibling that it's a problem with too? A male sibling?
No, both of my I do have nothing but brothers, so that is the signification. But one of the brothers did side with my father. I mean, we're cool, but yeah, he definitely is he's daddy's boy, if that makes sense.
Right, and so this might have something to do with that as well. So that would have something to do with that as well. So like you said, we're cool. There could be an aspect like where exactly is it? 29 degrees of Scorpio, so it's really right here. So the
it depends on which node you use, which calculation you use, because if it's a mean node, then it'll be Sagittarius Gemini. But if it's a true node, if it's a true node, it'll be Scorpio.
I'd rather use the mean. I'd rather use the mean node.
Okay.
So which means if it's that, then it makes even more sense because then the Jupiter is the ruler of it, right? The Jupiter rules the fourth. So, so that's important. So one of so that's equally important. It's either way kind of works for me, to be honest with you, because the Mars, the Mars is kind of indicative of what you've been going through with it, and the Jupiter is who you've been going through it with. Instead. So if we saw it as a 0 Sagittarius, so what's going on with the Jupiter? There's nothing applying to the Jupiter, and Jupiter Jupiter is applying widely, but widely applying to the Saturn, widely, like just out of mighty, with the Saturn. So
and there's a little bit of a Pluto sextile between the Pluto and Jupiter as well.
So one of the things about dealing with me is you're going to notice that I'm going to always take the applying aspects are always going to take precedence for me.
Got it. Fair.
They're always going to take precedence. And
fair.
So yes, and as a result, I mean the thing is that I am not saying that the separating aspects have no influence, but
it's just in the past.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's the fact that it's applying. It's why is that applying? Is kind of how I tend to look. It's like, oh, that's applying. What does that imply as opposed to the separating aspect that we know has already happened? We can definitely see it in the person, but it's the applying aspects, like I've been telling Layla and everybody else, I have a tendency to really notice that the applying aspects in my particular life and in my chart are the most active in my life. They're the most relevant to my life. And so in this particular case, like for instance, the Mercury Mars is the main applying aspect, and then you've got the moon Saturn. So the moon Saturn square and the Mercury Mars square. Now, there is another important thing, because this is a nighttime chart, and Saturn is the ruler of the father by night. And here we have the other aspect of the soul also squaring it. So it's good that these are squares instead of oppositions, because there's love but challenge, there's friction but love. There can still be love with these aspects. There can still be love with these aspects. However, we can even see with this one that it's a little bit more serious than I may have thought, because the moon is being squared from her fall. Saturn's in her fall. So we can even see that maybe the father has limited some of your ability to emotionally express and fully feel authentic emotion. So it looks like there are daddy issues in this chart. That's basically, and so if we use the mean node at 0 Sagittarius, something Sagittarius, then the father, the ruler of the fourth, is the ruler of that.
Absolutely.
And it's in fall. So he's not what we would want him to be. And let's talk about this, because you and I and Layla, we are definitely family, because we all have detrimented Jupiters. And Layla and I, hers is in Virgo and retrograde, mine is in Gemini in retrograde.
Wow.
And
So
so
I
one of
came in and completed the tribe.
sure did, baby. You sure did. So one of the things that I noticed about these Jupiters, and one of the things I just learned really this year, was that with the kind of Jupiter that we have, we cannot really rely on expansion. Like we can't sit back and just expect things to go well because our
Right.
Jupiters don't expand. So what has to happen is we have to actually be gardeners and continuously work at the thing that we want to grow. Jupiter naturally makes things grow, but we don't have those kinds of charts. And so
Right.
this chart will want their father to be a more expansive person than he can be.
Correct.
And right, this Jupiter is in fall. It can't expand. It can
Correct.
only be practical. It can only reduce things to brass tacks. It can only reduce things to the bottom line. Well, how are you gonna make money with that? Right? It can only do those
Right.
things.
Yeah. And we talked, I said this in the clubhouse, but Layla, you weren't there. And since we're family, you gotta know my shit. So my dad and my mom, both of them were pastors. They were co-pastors of a church.
Oh, that's
So
right.
that is a Jupiter in Sagittarius kind of thing, even though this is in Capricorn. I mean, I'm just explaining kind of my fourth house situation here. Plus, he was in the military, so he was a military chaplain there.
Oh, fucking authoritarian.
Oh,
I know it's tough,
Yeah.
right? It was a lot, right? It's
Jupiter
like right
and Saturn doesn't get more Jupiter and Saturn than that.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Capricorn, right? Because Mars is the exaltation ruler of Capricorn. He's the
Yeah.
military.
Exactly.
And you've got the Mars
Exactly.
in the fourth, right? The military man, right?
It's
So
perfect.
Oh,
It's
really,
so
yeah.
perfect. So when my dad got audited by the IRS 8 different times.
Oh,
8 different times. After he retired from the military, he started his own church.
right. That's right, because the ruler of the eighth is in the fourth. That's right.
8. Yeah, I was about to say, yeah, the ruler of the 8th.
Isn't it crazy?
is.
Redonkulous. It's redonkulous. So me and my father, we do not talk. It came from the fact of, just to give you a little bit more detail to what you're saying and validation to what you're saying, my father was diagnosed with having a narcissistic personality disorder. Not the narcissism that people talk about where it's just like, I want to take pictures all day. Like, no, like it's a real thing that he just can't.
My mother.
Okay, so you get it. Y'all, I think y'all probably really get it more than anybody. Like he just can't expand the way that you're speaking on. He literally just can't. Like I have compassion for him because he just doesn't know how. Like he wants to, but he just can't expand.
Can't do it. Can't go any further. Yeah. So this Jupiter, once again, this Jupiter's in fall. So yeah, it really kind of can't. So I just want to say one more thing. Jupiter also rules the 7th house, which means you have to be very careful about the kind of people you attract and pick.
Absolutely. My husband and I have been married for 10 years, and I had to continue on that journey. I literally told him, he was very afraid because when we started dating, he was like, I do sound like your dad. Are you gonna like cut me off? I'm like, no. I realized that this is just a continuation of closure to those lessons because I can't do it with my dad. He can't expand. I can't talk to him. So it felt like my husband became